Okay, so moving on to objective 1B. To complete this objective, you're going to need, again, to create an account on github.com, which is the code repository website where we'll be storing most of the work you do in this class. I'm also going to have you sign up for some student benefits for GitHub that will give you some stuff for free. You're also going to create a repository on GitHub, which is where we're a collection of files where we're going to store all of our code for this particular class. And then lastly, I'm going to show you how to pull that repository down to your local machine so you can start moving files into it. Okay, so from the link in the lab, go to github.com and go ahead and create a free account here. You can use your Maryland address or you can use other IDs. It doesn't really matter. So go ahead and sign up for that. And then once you've done that, there's another link on there to what's called the Student Developer Pack. So go ahead and click that link. And click on this Get Student Developer Pack or Get Benefits for Student. And you're going to go ahead and log in with your newly created GitHub address, and it'll push you back. Anyway, you'll go ahead and sign up for this GitHub Student Pack. Among the things it will give you is the ability to have both public and private repositories. So private collections of code that only you can get access to, or whoever you allow access to, including me, or make them public so the whole world can see. So nice benefit there. Okay, so I'm going to assume you've created both the GitHub username and password, and you have signed up to create you signed up to get the Student Developer Pack. If you have any issues with that, let me know. The next thing we're going to do then is create a what's called a repository for this class where we're going to store all of the code we write. So I'm just going to go ahead and log into my GitHub account here. So just a note, this is me on GitHub. I am S. Mussenden. And you see a list of all the different repositories that I've contributed to or created. This right here, for example, 20 fall data journalism connected by underscores is the repository where I store all of the labs that I've created for this class and some other things. There'll be times this semester when you're interacting with that. So here, for example, is this. So a repository is a collection of code that I'm contributing to and updating over time. So there's all sorts of files in here and folders, including, for example, here's the lab that made the web page you're looking at, the markdown file that made the web page you're looking at, all stored up here on GitHub. So there are lots of users on GitHub, millions, I'm guessing, quite a few, who are creating repositories, work together in repositories. So GitHub is a website where data journalists, software developers, and others who work with code share files, where they store files, where they collaborate on projects. It's based on a software development protocol called Git, which is a fancy form of what's called version control, where you make changes to a file. It has a good sense of changes you've made previously, and it keeps track of those. So if you ever screw up something or want to go back to an earlier version of the file, then you can do that. If you've ever used Google Docs and gone and looked back at like earlier revisions of a text file, it's the same concept essentially. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a new repository for you to use for this class. So I've logged in. Here's my home page. Also keeps track of all the work I've done in the past year. So we're going to create a new repository. So you can come up to this plus sign here in the upper right corner and new repository. You often hear people call these repos. If you're too busy to say repository, that's a really common way. So repo repository, collection of code files where you'll store your work. So we're going to create a new repo, and just what I would say is, you create this first repo. Please just follow along with me exactly what I'm doing in terms of boxes I'm checking. So the first thing is, you're going to start with your initials. So in my case, it's SM underscore. We never want to put spaces in our repo names. So 2020 fall data journalism. So replace SM with your initials, whatever you want. This will just be how we track it. We'll give it a description. So the description is, in this case, will be repository or repo for JOR 472, 772 at the University of Maryland. Let's go ahead and throw data journalism in there. Okay, so two options here. One is public. Anybody on the web can find it and see it. Most of my repos are public, although sometimes when I'm just starting out things, I'll start them private. Or private, only you can see it. If you've gotten a student developer pack, you should be able to have a private repo without having to sign up for a paid version of GitHub. Please don't sign up and pay any money for GitHub. Get the student developer pack. If you want to keep it public, fine with me. We'll talk more about this in the future, but GitHub also kind of serves as like your resume in some ways. If you're doing data journalism, or your portfolio, a place you can show to other journalists that you can do this kind of work when you're applying for jobs. So I don't know, I'd suggest public, but if you're not comfortable with that, that's totally fine. So go ahead and set it to private. I'm going to set this to private in this case. And then three options. So first is initialize the repository with a README. A README is a form of a text file that basically says, here's what this repository is all about. I'll just give you an example here. The New York Times has a repository on its GitHub account where it's storing all of the data it's collecting about COVID-19 that its reporters are collecting from health departments across the country. Its README on this repo is a long discussion about what's in the data, what's not in the data, what the fields stand for, that sort of thing. So that's what a README is useful for. Just for now, the only thing on your README will be this description. So we're going to add it. We're going to add what's called a gitignore. And a gitignore is a kind of file that allows you to automatically exclude from transferring to the GitHub website files of a certain type. A really common example with this would be there's a limit on GitHub of the size of data files that you can store. They all have to be under 100 megs. So I will often add a line to my gitignore file saying, don't send this file if it's over a certain size. Or sometimes there's a file that contains like passwords to access websites that I might need to include in my data code that I will add to my gitignore. So it's on my local machine. I have it, but I won't put it on the web where anybody can steal it or use it. So the gitignore template, because we're mostly going to be writing R this semester, we're going to add is R, and all this does is it just builds in like there's some common types of files when you're working with R that you may never want to push to GitHub, so it just automatically bakes those in. And then lastly, we're going to choose a license, which just tells others what they can and do with your code. If you don't want anybody reusing your code or anything, you can definitely set it to none. But I usually choose the Apache or MIT license. It gives people certain rights to copy my code and use it with credit. Okay, so lastly, after you've done all that, you've got the repository named, you got a description, you made a decision about whether you want to set it to public or private. In this case, I'm going to set it to private because I'm going to show you what I need you to do if you set it to private so that you can give me access to it this semester. You need to add a README file. You need to add a gitignore with a template for R, and then choose a license, either none or Apache or MIT, and create the repository. And that should take just a second. Here's what I want to do. I want to show you, if you have chosen to set private, you are going to need to give me access to it so that I can review your code and offer feedback and grade the semester. And there may be times down the road when you're working in group projects where you're going to need to give other people access to your code. But for now, this is what you should do. So click on the three dots here and go to Settings. If your monitor is big enough, it should just show up as this um, key. So Settings, and then Manage Access, invite a collaborator, then my Git username, it's in real big up here, right? S Mussenden, so SMUSSENDEN. It can't find it because it's me, but this will pop up for you, and there'll be a link saying send me an invite. So I'll need to make sure that I have access to that too. If you ever want to change your repository to public, you can go to options, scroll all the way down, and you can click this button to make it visible. Okay, so we have now created the repository. So here's the page for it. So our last step then is to use GitHub Desktop to pull our class, that repository we created, down to our local machine. So it exists up here on the web. There's nothing really in it except for there's this README we created. And there's the license, and there's this what's called the git ignore file, showing you all the types of files to ignore. But there's nothing in it yet. We actually want to put stuff in it. So to do that, we need to get a local copy of it pulled down to our machine. And that's where that software tool GitHub Desktop comes in handy. So I am going to pull up my applications folder. And you may have, you can put this in your dock on a Mac. If you're on a PC, it's going to be however you access programs through your start menu. The icon is this little thing called, it's their mascot. It's called the GitHub Octocat, which is like a combination of an octopus and a cat for some reason. Anyway, go ahead and load up GitHub Desktop. And when it pops up, this is what it's going to look like. It looks like this for me because I have all of these repositories that I regularly work with that I've been pulling down. For you, this should be blank, kind of on the side. To get your repository pulled down from github.com through GitHub, the first thing we're going to do is you're going to sign in. So if I go up to GitHub Desktop and go to Preferences, it's going to ask me to sign into my account. So I'm going to do that. This is a really nice thing. Sign in using your browser. You could type your Git username and password, but if you're already logged into GitHub through your browser, you can just click sign in using your browser, open GitHub Desktop, and there we are now. Okay, so we're logged in, but you will not have any repositories yet. The first thing that we need to do is click this button that says Add, and then it's going to give us a couple options: clone repository, create new repository, add existing repository. So we're going to clone the repository. So cloning is the act of pulling it from somewhere else, in this case github.com, the package, and pulling it down to our local machine. So where it says find your repositories, you can just start typing like your initials. So SM20 fall data journalism, there it is there. If it doesn't show up for some reason, you can always refresh. So I could hit the clone button and it'll pull it down. Before I do that, the path is sort of important. This is where it's going to put it on your local machine. So right now it is set to go onto my desktop into a folder its own folder called SM 2020 Fall Data Journalism. So I could just hit clone, that's where it'll go. If you want to keep it somewhere else in your documents folder or in your downloads, although I don't know why you do that necessarily, you can choose where it goes. I personally like to keep it on my desktop, but that's up to you. If for some reason, by the way, it doesn't show up when you just start searching and it doesn't show up when you refresh, we can also load it via a URL. So we could put just the name of the repository here. So in this case, it would be smussenden / SM _ 2020 _ fall _ data _ journalism, which if I just pull over this, here you can see that's the path to the file. So that's an alternative way of doing it via URL. So regardless of which way I do it, this way or this way, after I've made sure that I'm putting it in the place that I want to put it, I'm going to go ahead and hit clone, and it pulls it down. Okay, so I just want to show this to you. Here it is on my desktop now. And it's got two files. The gitignore file that I told you about, if you remember, that was the thing that says to ignore certain kinds of files. That's missing here. It's not here. It's what's called a hidden file. So there are other ways to access it, which I'll show you at a later date. Anyway, so if you've done all that, if you've created your GitHub account, if you've created the repo, if you've set it private, you've given me permission to it, if you've logged in to GitHub Desktop, if you've cloned your repository and you've been able to find it on your desktop or wherever else you put it, then you have completed this objective. So we're going to move to the next one.